Thank you for joining us for tonight's meeting. We're here to discuss the Community Development Block Grant Fiscal Year 20 application. This will be a project discussion. Thank you for those who are joining us. Rosemary Scrivens, we have our Economic Development and Planning Director. We have our town councilors in attendance. Thank you all for being here. And we have Eric Rumsey behind the camera. Thank you, Eric. We're going to quickly just review the proposed projects and get some feedback from those who are in attendance. Before we move into the proposed projects, I want to briefly discuss a little background on the CDBG program itself. As counselors, you're well aware of the mini entitlement program, but for those who might be watching at home, for your awareness, we are a mini entitlement community based on our socioeconomic data. Massachusetts determines this by formula. We do not have to apply competitively. We're eligible for typically up to $825,000, and we have to meet national objectives within our programs. Those are addressing slum and blight, benefiting low to moderate income residents, and addressing urgent economic development needs. Our largest investment activities over the years have been housing rehab and infrastructure. And we have to work within our 4 established target areas. You see the red is our Worcester Henry low to moderate income community. We have our yellow target area is the Morris Coombs low to moderate income community. We have the green is our downtown blighted area, and the purple is our Globe Village blight area. You'll see on the next slide, for those of you who have the handouts, I'm not sure if it's too small for you to see. On the left of the figure are dollars in millions. On the right, in yellow, is the yellow line representing the number of communities that are funded. You can see these 2 lines diverging. The point of this slide is to just show you that as funding has been decreasing over the years, the number of communities being funded has increased. And so the impact that these community development block grants is having is decreasing, unfortunately. You feel the impact less because you have less money per community. The next slide shows the activities by pie chart. One of the things I like to highlight here is the amount of infrastructure we've invested in over the years. From an economic development perspective, that's one of the strongest impacts we can have in order to drive private investors to Southbridge. Would you like to speak to that more?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you help your storefronts look better, you know, other investors or other property owners will be more apt to want to invest in their property. Same thing with infrastructure. That's really one of the few things that a community can directly invest in that will have such a direct impact on economic development, because if we don't keep up our roads or we don't put in gas lines or water and sewer, keep those up in areas of town, then obviously businesses can't exist. So infrastructure is really, really important in terms of what a community can do for, you know, to grow its economic base.
Proposed projects for the CDBG fiscal year 20 application fall within the following categories: housing, code enforcement, economic development, commercial rehab, infrastructure, and public facilities and planning. We'll break out each one of those. For housing and code enforcement, we'll continue with the part-time building code enforcement officer and the 60% funding of the health code enforcement officer. I can speak in depth to each of those, but for the sake of time, we'll zip through high level. Economic development, commercial rehab, we'll be doing the signs, awnings, and facades, or at least we'd like to propose that. For infrastructure, talking with the DPW and the town manager, it was agreed that if we could consider West Street full depth reconstruction, the lower portion is in our Globe Village target area, and we could potentially consider adding sidewalks on the west side of the road. That would help leverage the Chapter 90 funds already scheduled on the pavement plan for this following year, so that would dovetail well. And we're also looking to consider the Foster Street and Hamilton Streets that are left between the Hook Street La Rochelle construction and the Main Street construction that will happen. That would help clean up those last stretches in between those projects for you to then consider in the future finishing the Central Street after you know what your future is in that area. And those would only be a mill and overlay just to clean up the streets. Public facilities project and planning, McCann Fields. We met with Councilor Adams, we met with the town manager, we talked over different ideas for funding parks playgrounds. We came up with, as a first attempt at improving McCann Fields, investing somewhere around $100,000 for some low-lying fruit, such as fencing at the back field, new backstop netting in the front field, shade structures for the dugouts, or dugouts for the benches, new scoreboard, and also doing planning to design a press box and add a bathroom. Yes.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Councilwoman Manna, I thought we put in new fencing at Hammond
You
Street.
did. You put in new fencing in the field adjacent to it.
Come on,
The fencing at the back field is what needs to
you
be
can sit here.
replaced.
Okay,
And
thank
when you
you.
go back there, you'll see the difference.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Because you can see the screen.
To your point, the town, thanks to previous year's CDBG investments, was able to do some small improvements a few years ago and completed a full design for the McCann Fields. However, the design was far too expensive for the town to be able to pursue. And so this would be a first step again towards making some improvements. And I just broke it out by activity, is what we call them in the CDBG world. It matches pretty well consistently with what previous year's activities have been. And so for the housing and code enforcement, that $60,000, again, those are the two part-time positions for inspections. One is proactive, one's reactive, and those really help in that sort of multi-pronged approach to economic development, where you want to try to increase the public's safety and health, reduce the amount of blight, and then at the same time be investing in other means. So we would be doing the code enforcement simultaneously. We'd be investing in the businesses through commercial rehab, doing signs, awnings, facades for local business owners in the target areas. We'd be doing infrastructure, as we talked about, and then the public facilities and planning is the parks, and administration and program delivery is on par as it has been within the last few years. One position is the administrative assistant, another is the CDBG coordinator, which is considered program delivery, and then there's partial payment towards the economic development director's salary, and that's about it. That goes through your slides. And so if anyone wants to discuss the projects further or suggest other projects at this time, we're open for feedback.
I have a question.
Counselor?
Thank you. You're going to have a public hearing on this, or for the public to come in and speak on what they want, or?
The CDBG process, the application process, requires that you have a public hearing at least 2 weeks in advance of applying for the grant. So that's out in January, February, that you would hold your formal public hearing. It's assumed by that time that you'll already have decided what you're pursuing. This right now is an opportunity for us to propose and get feedback for the application process.
And this was a public meeting.
And this
that
is
was
a public
posted
meeting.
For the town, on the town
But
clerk.
meeting and hearing is two different things.
Correct.
So, yeah.
This is a meeting for public participation. And because there were other meetings, as I mentioned when you first came in, we'll plan to hold another public meeting sometime, hopefully in the next month, to be able to ensure that there is enough public participation. I want the town to feel like everyone agrees that this is the direction we're going to pursue, so that there are no surprises once we get into the public hearing.
Yeah, and I just want to elaborate a little bit. So obviously, there's certain parts of town where projects are eligible, as Peg showed you those target areas. So if there were members of the public that didn't know this program at all, we need to kind of set out the parameters. We can't just say, give us your wish list, obviously, because it would be a waste of time. We have to say, here's the target areas, and here's the, Peg provided you with kind of some categories of the types of things that are eligible and the total amount that we have. And then it just leads to a more productive conversation, so then people can kind of, by looking at those parameters, think about some of the things that they think are needed, or comment on the things that we're proposing, that maybe there's some serious problem with something we're proposing that we didn't know about.
If I could, so this is the FY20 application, but money's not received well into the FY21, correct?
So similar right now, we're about to be contracted for the fiscal year 19 contract. It is October. I understand you're usually able to secure funds November of that grant year. So by November of 2020, assume you'd probably be.
Which moves into FY21.
Then you're right, exactly. So your construction year would be the following year. But you could be entering into design contracts around that time. You could be, working with your commercial rehab to be considering signs on facade projects. So heat things up for then things to get moving in the construction season of 21.
No, my only question is, we have some funding for housing code enforcement people that goes into a different fiscal year. So you have to plan ahead.
Correct.
Because they've already been part of the budget.
Correct.
We've been collaborating with Andy so that he understands when, because it's usually an 18-month grant, so it's all kind of on a spreadsheet between our department and Andy's department. By the way, we did just get the contract for the what they call FY19, our FY19 grant that we submitted in March. So that'll be coming before you guys shortly.
Do you have any feedback about the proposed projects?
I think now, for me personally, now that I have an understanding, I look forward to the next meeting to be able to come back with some more questions as I look into figure out the other projects that we have, because we do know that Main Street is on one project, and like you said, it's dovetail into that other area, and where it all fits in with DPW for the hook reconfiguration. So I think for me personally, I have to understand all that, and we're still awaiting some information from the manager's office as to what capital projects are out there. So I think it all fits in. So we have to have, for me, I think I have a better understanding and discussion of all the projects that are outlined, what monies are there, and how it all fits together.
Okay, very good.
I think, I think Globe Village is a really good target area. I think you're coming into town and, I think targeting that area would be very beneficial for Southbridge too.
Thank you for bringing that up. If I could just mention, when it was discussed where we'll be doing commercial rehab, we had talked about the gateway into, this was a conversation with the redevelopment authority, trying to invest in the West Gateway. The hope is that if we all decide that that's the best location to focus the commercial rehab, that we can try to work with the business owners right there to have them improving their own properties. We'd also looked at, could we do any infrastructure on that gateway? But because it's state-owned road right there, it wouldn't be an opportunity for us.
So I don't know if you're aware, probably, I think it was my first year I was on council, so within 2013, UMass came in and did a study.
Yes.
So the redevelopment authority pulled out, Holly brought up that study. We pulled out that study. We looked at what from that study could we apply towards any improvements. And so what we found again was it's this beautification of the businesses as you're coming into the gateway, but because we have no easement, we have no land to be able to beautify, we thought, okay, if we can work in partnership with the commercial rehab program, those business owners can be making investments through the grant program.
And a lot of it was talking about landscaping, if you recall. So if you could kind of have this landscaped screen almost along that, even like in front of Big Bunny Plaza or, just all along there. And so it was also called out in the economic development plan that was completed in 2013 as a place, as a part of town, because it's a gateway, that we should be focusing on for economic development, and that they really, in that plan, it spoke about that too, to beautify that gateway, because that's a first impression that you get when you come from Sturbridge. And, it is our newest target area, so it's kind of nice if you can really focus on one kind of smaller area of town, because then you can kind of create a bigger impact. So between that lower West Street with the, the paving and the sidewalk, and then the western gateway of doing, kind of the landscaping, hopefully that would have an impact, pretty big impact in that part of town.
And then you have the redevelopment of the main street as you come up over there. So,
Right, right,
So
yeah,
it all ties in.
Yes.
yeah.
I agree with Councilman Mann that the old village needs some attention. I'm curious as to how far up West Street you're talking about potentially milling and paving.
I know that your pavement plan calls it out exactly, so you could refer to it there. We can only fund up through the end of the target area. If you look at the target area map, it's just below the school is about where we can fund to.
Yeah, I think it stops like right where that, that red container was on West Street?
Yep.
Right there.
Right there.
And then everything behind that is fine, but upwards is out of that target area.
But the Chapter 90 funds, I think that she
Maybe
could
identify.
use that to go all the way to the end.
However you fund your pavement plan, she was saying the opportunity to work with us using the CDBG funds just adds literally extra mileage to her project.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's to my point of having further discussions about what is on the books, the capital plans, and where we're at with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you for taking time out of your night.
Thank
Do you guys have any other questions or comments, or no? This kind of gives you some food for thought, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There you go.
Food.
Food.
That word again.
Andrew, did you have any comments while you're here?
She's right on the money. The last few meetings we've been talking about where the RDA is going to look forward, because we do have a lot already laid down to be part of the urban renewal plan. It's a good portion of that is already laid down in the pipe. So we were discussing where do we go from here, because once that's done, Central Street Fire Station's still up in the air. I don't want to sit idle. So we were discussing what potential we could do down there, and what courses of action we need to take in order to kind of have a little bit of input as far as what would go for redevelopment down there in the Globe Village area.
I have some conversation about Central Street too. Good work. Good plan. Let's go.